Okay. So, I mean, I started recording. So, before we begin, like you said on the call or the text, this can be a very relaxed conversation. I'm not very, what is it? I'm not a very confrontational person in general. I like to hear people's ideas and I like to get to the core of things. So, yeah, this is definitely
Yeah,
going to be an interesting conversation. But without further ado, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
right. So my name's Tobias. I'm 20 years old from Sweden. Um, I'm gonna start studying to become a teacher in spring, and I'm currently doing nothing. I'm in between jobs, I guess. Right. I worked before that in a theme park kind of thing. But I've been a Marxist for about 5 years, and I've been a member of an organization called the Revolutionary Communist Youth, which is the youth wing of a communist party here in Sweden. I've been a member there for 4 or maybe 5 years. Um, so I would say I'm a fairly experienced Marxist. I haven't read everything there is to read, and I haven't done everything there is to do, but I think I can present the ideology quite well.
All right, fantastic. So how about we start with like what is your definition of Marxism, and does that apply to the economy or human behavior or the law? How would you kind of define that?
Marxism is kind of a it's a very broad thing. Marxism is well, it calls itself a science, which I mean you can disagree with how scientific it actually is, but it kind of structures itself in that way, in that it tries to analyze why things happen in society and who profits or who gains things from things. Like why does labor happen? Why do wars happen? And why do revolutions happen? Why did the French Revolution happen? Like what's at the core of these different things? And I mean, a big part of it is, well, the analysis of the capitalist system, which I think you and I, we have a different definition of capitalism. What I define as capitalism is a lot broader, I think, than what you define as capitalism. I think you define it as like this total freedom of ownership. Like you can do whatever the hell you want, right? Except violating that non-aggression principle, kind of. But our definition of capitalism is a lot more based on the process by which commodities are produced. Um, so, for example, you have the system of slavery, right, where you have the slave owner who owns the land, or he has bought land, or he has gotten it from somewhere, conquest or something, and he buys tools and he buys grain, like all of the things needed for production, and he buys slaves. And then he forces those slaves to go out and work and produce the commodity of more grain or bread or whatever else, right? And so you have feudalism, where instead the lord leases the land, and you have to pay an absolute or a percentage of your of the commodities you produce to him, or and then we come to the capitalist system in which you sell your time, your late or your power to do labor uh, in hours, basically, and then this time is used to produce commodities. So it's about this core this core principle of how production is arranged in society. That's how we Marxists classify
Okay.
societies, and that's why,
Okay,
for
that's cool.
example, yeah, we would, for example, say that Nazi Germany was capitalist, which I mean, I don't think a libertarian would agree with that, but that's because we're dealing with a different concept, kind of.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if that's the case, then let's simplify this. I can just we can just get rid of the word capitalism for now, and we can stick to
Yeah.
another term that we can agree on. Like, how about voluntarism? Because I think that the true identity of capitalism is voluntarism, and we probably don't agree on that. So, for the sake of this discussion, how about we just talk about voluntarism and your problems with voluntarism?
Right. So Marxism really, I mean, Marxism as a thing more is a movement that exists because of the real world. Like we are so-called philosophical materialists. We only believe in the real world kind of thing. So like in in an abstract world where there is no inequality, like where everyone is of equal power and where you can have these like and where every economic relationship is like the same or like consensual, then like Marxism ceases to have like a purpose, right? So like we can like we don't deal in like, oh, so this is what utopia should look like. Rather, like we are more based on like where are we now and where do we want to go? Like what is better for the worker in this instance? And like the way I understand voluntarism is it's more just a loose kind of society where nothing is forced on anyone else, and like the principle is that everyone knows that if we work together things become better. Or
Yeah, yeah. Well, I would just say
yeah,
voluntarism is a few different things. I think many people would call it an ethical theory. But for me, it would just be,
yeah,
I guess it could be an ethical theory, though I don't believe really in ethics. I believe it's a type of mutualism in which everyone benefits who, let's see, contributes to this same system of, let's say, governance. Okay, I would call voluntarism a method or a way of governing a society or a certain group of people. And the way that this would work is that, um, honestly, at the end of the day, it's like, when we are trying to, um, create society, what we are trying to do is we all have different things about us, different things that we value, things that we want to strive toward. And the thing about voluntarism is it is what allows us to all have an equal playing field in being able to achieve the things that we value without forcing each other to do what we want them to do with their bodies. So, like you said before, libertarianism is this idea that we want to peacefully coexist with people that we disagree with. And that, at the end of the day, is what voluntarism is. So we just basically don't want to force people to do things that they don't want to do. Essentially, and very easily, it's just that we believe in consent. That's as simple as it is.
right,
We just believe in consent of your body and your private property.
right. And so I I wouldn't I wouldn't disagree that that would be a good society. Like that is probably a good society. But the issue, the thing we're forgetting about is that there are power relations that exist not because of the states, right? That I think you might disagree on that point,
No, I
but
agree.
there are. You agree, right? Yeah. So like the classic example, of course, is that as a worker, for example, like if you're a normal person in society, worker has, or like proletarian has this fairly rigorous definition in Marxism, but like basically just a normal person. If you're a normal person, you have to eat, you have to live somewhere, and if you want to like feel good as a person, then you have to consume a certain amount of things. You have to wear clothes that aren't 100 years old or like broken, and you have to like be a part of society. That's a very fundamental drive. And so in that relationship with your your employer, or the capitalist, as we could call them, um, and the person that owns the capital, that owns the factory, you are underpowered in that relationship. In that, um, the employer just does not need you as much as you need him, right? You like the employer can easily live with a little bit less profit, right? A little bit less profit, that less worker, like one less worker, that's nothing, right? Like if he fires you, that's, I mean, yeah, that's gonna impact the bottom line maybe, but like it's going to impact you a lot more than that. And so there's already there a power um, difference in who owns things, and like who owns these factories, and this just by itself creates this inequality in society that you can't just eradicate with good ideas, right?
Right. Okay. I see where you're coming from, and I pretty much agree with everything you said. I think that this is the fundamental difference because really the core of the argument of capitalism versus communism is this idea of it's the cases on the outskirts, which is that the billionaire doesn't need all his money. In reality, he doesn't need that much. He could live, making 50, 60K a year. But the idea is that people are dying around him as he's accumulating lots and lots of wealth. And it is a bad thing that people are dying when someone has more wealth than they know what to do with. And so the question
Yeah,
is it ethical for us to take the money, trim the top or even more, some more
yeah,
hardcore communists would say just take everything extra he doesn't need and give it to the people. Is that ethically justified? And that's where the core argument
yeah.
is.
But the thing is that communism actually, what you're talking about are more the symptoms of what communism is against, right? Like these riches that the capitalists have, they come from somewhere. Um, is kind of the belief, but really, like the core of it is that um, there are classes in society which are defined by their interests in society. So, as a worker, you have this shared interest with every other worker that you want lower rent, you want higher wages, lower prices on food, and the capitalist has the inverse of those interests, and there are these contradictions between people in society, and there is an antagonistic, like an unresolvable contradiction between the employed and the employer, in that the employer could um, theoretically always lower wages in order to increase profits, which is always good for him. Or like you could skim off the top. Of course, there's like competition, which makes this harder and more impossible. And but in turn, the worker has this interest in, well, we could reduce profits and increase wages, and these interests is what Marxism really identifies. And what we say is that the workers should follow their interest in this case, or rather that the workers have the power to follow this interest, and that the society that would result from the interests of the worker is more stable, in that we can abolish these contradictions in society.
Okay, so let me
Kind
ask
of.
you this. Would you say that the workers' interests outweigh the capitalists' interests? And if so, is it just because of sheer numbers, or is there a specific reason why workers' interests are more important than the capitalists?
Well, the thing is, importance is subjective. I am a worker, thus my interests are more important to me than the interests of the other class. Like this is like that's the thing. Like, and because of what we believe is the power in the proletariat, in like we communists, we believe that value is created by labor, or by it's a little bit more complicated. Like there are a lot of like labor theory value is often misrepresented a little bit. It's a bit more complicated than some make it out to seem. But basically, we believe that the majority of value in society is created by the majority of people, and so it's entirely feasible for this majority of workers to take over and continue producing this majority of value, um, which of course, we don't have to say that this is theoretically possible. It was possible in, for example, the Soviet Union. Like the Soviet Union had its faults, and it did collapse in the end. But no one can like it was stable for a while, right? It did function as a, and it did grow, and it increased the life quality of the people that lived there. If you look at the actual statistics, um, essentially every single year that wasn't like war was just an increase in average life expectancy and average, caloric intake and all of this.
Right, right. Let me ask you this
Yeah.
though. So it sounds like your core belief is that you believe in a type of collectivist consequentialism where the mass majority of people's values is more important than the minority's people's values. So to test your logic, would you say that's accurate?
I mean, it's it, I don't really like the thing is these interests exist, right? Like this thing that the worker wants higher wages, that interest exists. And it's not a question of importance, rather it's a question of who is stronger, right? Kind of. But yeah,
What,
like
like might makes
go on.
right?
Yeah. What?
Like might makes right, you mean?
Um, I mean, kind of like not of course in just some
Wait, this seems
absurd like
antithetical.
fascism, but yeah,
This seems
but
antithetical to communism. I could
but
be wrong,
but,
but it
but it
sounds like you're
yeah,
advocating that who has power in society is justified in using their power. Is that what you're
but
saying?
the thing is, what we're talking about here is a moral issue, right? And morals exist to justify society. Like that, this is why all of those brilliant old Greek philosophers didn't see an issue with slavery, because slavery was just like necessary. It was just like a thing society does, in the same way that wage labor is a thing society does now. It's um, and really like the core point is that, well, it's not the interests of like it's not individuals with might. Like individuals don't have might in our in our opinion. Like it's groups that have this might. And like the reason we believe that the proletariat, like the only reason we are Marxist, is because we believe that the proletariat and the working class can be stronger than the capitalist class. Otherwise there would be no point in fighting.
Okay, but from a moral perspective, are you saying that the morally superior class is the one with more power, or are you saying something else?
Um, More what I'm saying is that like you have this interest as a worker, you have this interest, and we believe everyone is going to fight for their interest. And there is and of course the theory is that capitalism is unstable at its core, due to these antagonistic contradictions. um,
Do you believe in
so
morality?
in I mean, I don't believe in objective morality, right? Morality, as far as I can see, shifts between societies, right? Like feudalism was moral when feudalism was the primary economic structure.
Why? Because it existed?
It, I mean, because society at the time thought
Okay, wait. So do you see morality as not like objective but like practical? So for example, if I
that.
were to say
Yeah,
morality is man-made, would you agree with that?
yeah. I mean, I see, like we Marxists see thoughts in society as created by society. Like these things exist because there is a reason in society for them to exist. Um, and so the state, for example, in capitalism has a reason to exist because the capitalist class needs a state to protect them from like to protect them from you know different things, from the
Smaller
possibility
businesses.
of revolution. Yeah, protect small businesses, also protect large businesses, right? Like this is why the state was created and why it existed. And like the function of the king with his army in feudalism was to ensure that society continues to function. And and so we really like that's the thing about Marxism. We believe in what exists, kind of like, or we don't we believe what exists creates the thoughts. That's the the basis for materialism.
Okay, that's a fair
Yeah.
position. But okay, so if I'm getting this right, either you don't believe in morality or Marxism doesn't believe in objective morality, right?
Yeah, Marxism doesn't believe in objective morality, and nothing Marxism says or does is actually like in communist circles, like occasionally, if you raise a certain argument, like if you raise an issue with a moralistic argument, people will just call you out on, well, that's just like moralism, right? Which is kind of an infectious thing to call people in communist circles. Like that's yeah, like do we don't choose things, or we strive to not choose things based on morals, because we believe that these morals are created by society, and they serve society.
Okay,
Like
cool,
it's
cool, cool.
immoral to take things from the capitalist, right? That's just, it's immoral to steal. But the thing is, which class does this moralism, which class does this serve? It serves the people who own, and it does not serve the people who do not own, which is the proletariat, or more easier said, the working class.
Okay. So what if you could put this in simple terms, what do you think Marxism's overall goal is to accomplish?
To improve the conditions of the working class.
Only the working class.
Well, yes, because Marxism is the ideology of the working class, or that is like that that's what we self-identify as, at least. Like, yeah, we see the world from the perspective of the working class, and that's
Okay.
what
But
we do. Yeah.
you're not making a moral case for it. You're just saying
No,
that
no.
Marxists
Yeah.
value their own interests and they will
Yes.
fight for their own interests, essentially.
Yes. Yes. So and really, that's the thing. Often times when you try to oversimplify communism and Marxism, you kind of stumble into this space where you're just like saying that like there was this old, before Marx, there was communism and socialism. Like those movements existed. They were kind of the same thing, and like they were called social democracy and blah blah blah. But basically, there were like people before Marx who we call utopian socialists, who wanted to just convince the capitalist that this process of wage labor is immoral. And then by convincing them of this, they would just stop being capitalists, and we could go over to a socialist mode of production. And just to clarify what I mean by socialism, because I think there are a lot of people who misunderstand that. But by socialism, I mean um, worker control of the means of production. I mean the Soviet Union in certain years, up to a certain point. I That's what I mean by socialism. Like the next step for us Marxists is socialism. And so there were these people who made these moral arguments to capitalists. But the thing is, it's not in the capitalist interests, and capitalist morality will never say that it's bad to be a capitalist. Like everyone creates their moral, like the moral system of society is created to serve the ruling class, and the ideas in society are primarily that, or like the default ideas, at least, like liberalism and all this, like liberalism. And by that I mean economic liberalism, kind of how Europeans use liberal, not the American sense. Like
Like classical liberalism.
yeah, yeah, classical liberalism, I guess. Like that's just like, yeah, that's good for the capitalist. um
Okay. No, that's cool. Well, this is interesting. I mean, so I would say that the root of your I of Marxism sounds like it's a subcategory of egoism. So I don't think you would disagree with that, right?
i
Which
mean
is that you serve your
I mean,
self
yeah.
interest.
I mean, it kind of like egoism is also just like egoism isn't, it's also a bunch of other things, the way like it, there are a bunch of other philosophical disagreements with the people that call themselves egoists, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like you know, who was that guy? Like the original egoist, that guy who we only have one caricature of, like one picture with like a very sharp jaw or something.
Oh, I don't
What's
know.
his name? Yeah, no, but basically, like the inventor of egoism, basically, like the only picture we have of him is a caricature drawn by Friedrich Engels, who was the uh, like Marxism should be called Marxism Engelism, but that sounds bad, so it's just Marxism. But Engels is basically just Marx's closest friend and the one who developed the ideology with him. But like egoism, I mean, I don't really know what egoism is that far. Like
I don't think most people do.
yeah,
Egoism isn't that big of a deal, I think. So
yeah,
egoism, the way I would say it is, and I would put this in terms of there's two different types of egoism, which is ethical egoism and psychological egoism. Now, psychological egoism is the idea that humans act based on their self-interest, and ethical egoism is the idea that you should act on your self-interest. Now, the way I see this in psychological terms is that everybody acts in their own interests, and they can't they can't deny that. Like, essentially, everybody is an
yeah,
egoist, and they must be an egoist because you can't act
yeah.
against your self-interest. All the decisions you make are
Or
based on preferences that you have.
I mean, like there are some problems with this, like that psychologists will raise about like people who are addicted to self hurt and things and addiction. But like, I get your point, and I kind of agree with that like we do what like our brain is built to do things that it thinks will be good for it, or that it thinks, or that trigger a mechanism that evolution thought like if you do this thing that would be good for you, if you trigger this mechanism you've done something that is good for you, and so we've tried to trigger those mechanisms, um, even if they objectively don't do the thing nature intended, for example, you know, drugs and stuff. But
Right.
my and I don't really care, like more like it's just a fact that humans do this, right? What is in their self-interest. That's just a fact. So like there is no point in saying if it's immoral or not. It's the way it is, right?
The way it
Um
is, yeah. Look, we agree
yeah,
on
and
something.
yeah, we agree on that. The difference I think is this I mean we have a very like Marxism is built on a bunch of concepts, philosophical concepts, and or a couple philosophical concepts, a couple economical concepts, and then Marx builds up on those. And I, I mean, yeah, the foundation of it is that. Like I'd say I'd agree with that. I'm not a philosopher, and I don't spend all that much time thinking about philosophy. I'm more interested in Marxist economics, but
That's
yeah,
fair. That's well, I understand. Philosophy is
yeah,
a whole other thing to talk about. But
yeah,
it's actually funny because philosophy is my specialty. It's the thing I studied, and it's the thing I love.
yeah,
And economics was a secondary reason. It's almost like the practical implementation of philosophy, and that's why I grew to love economics so much. Is because the more I learned about it, I'm like, this is if there's any category in the world where philosophy applies most, it is economics, and that's the idea because it's
yeah, fair.
economics really is like the study of human behavior and if we should guide it in a certain direction or not. And philosophy is all about the idea of is it good or is it wrong to guide human behavior and things like this. So that's
Yeah,
why I got interested in that. But we both agree with egoism. We both agree that people will pursue their self interests. Now, there's two roads that we
yeah,
can go down, and one of those roads is the Marxism economic path, and the other road is the what I would call the voluntarism economic path, which is where you are able to freely trade with whoever you wish, and you can do this so long as nobody hurts each other. And then the other path, the Marxist path, would be the idea that if uh, if a class gets too powerful, you're able to bring them in, hamper them using coercion or violence if necessary. What do you think?
yeah. I mean, like really. I think, I mean, I'm more comfortable talking about Marxist economics, but the thing is, I mean, we have power structures in society, and like these these power structures, like the people who have who own land, who own the factories that produce things, and all of this, it's good for them with free trade. Like that's really good for capitalists. That's why, I mean, all of these things, but it's like saying that everything should be voluntary, and like abolishing the supposed force that exists in society. But like that's the thing, the force that exists in society today exists simply to serve the capitalist class. Like most of it you can strip down to, like, if we didn't have this force, then either it would directly hurt profits, or it would, like, I mean, if we wouldn't, I don't know, like, um, if we wouldn't hinder certain actions that would, like, just destabilize society, and people would no longer be able to be as productive or efficient. Um, and so, like, force in society exists to keep society working. Like, and it is that way in every society in human history. And I mean, if we look at, like, capitalists who love to talk about how politics should never be violent and all of this, but like if we look at the roots of capitalism, like where did capitalism come from? How did they first, like, how was capitalism established? It was by uh, taking a bunch of French people and chopping off their heads, right? And yeah, I mean that was the only way to crush the and like to become this, like, to free the capitalist class, in the same way that, like, slave revolts and all of this was a way to free and free the slave and turn them into peasants, because that was more effective at the time. And at the time of the French Revolution, they needed, like, the economic system had reached a point where it could no longer be sustained. It could no longer grow without war, and they had done so many wars and all of this that it was no longer feasible. And the path society took was the path of a different economic system. Um, there is this
Yeah.
concept of dialectical and historical materialism that Marx applies to understand history, which is kind of complicated, but yeah. Like, if you want to understand how communists reason about things, then you should really look into dialectical and historical materialism.
Okay, well, is that like a, I don't know, is that like a way of explaining the values of communists or what?
It's a way to explain society. Why is society the way it is? Basically, it's a combination of dialectics from Hegel, which has to do with how, like, if you have two things which disagree with each other, they will fight and turn into a high and when that fight is resolved, when the contradiction is resolved, you have, like, a higher form you have, like, a combination of the two things, which is at a higher form. So, for example, we would describe the French Revolution as the class struggle between the the aristocrats against the bourgeois, allied with the peasants, and this contradiction between these two was solved and turned into capitalism. Like, it changed the entire, like there was, the contradiction is in the economic relationship between aristocrats, capitalists, and peasants. And so when this relationship, this contradictory relationship, is solved, by going to a higher phase of economic development.
Okay. Do you mind if I ask you
I,
some
yeah.
microeconomic questions about Marxism?
Sure.
Okay. Have you ever heard of Liquid Zulu?
Of who?
Liquid Zulu, who's a YouTuber.
No.
Okay, I'll ask you a famous question he asks all the time, which is, and this is like the practical use of your Marxist law. You go to a deserted island. There's two people, and they both pick up a stick, and it's just a stick. One person wants to use it to hunt, and the other person wants to use it to fish. Now you have a contradiction. You have a conflict, and law is supposed to solve conflicts. So, in this scenario, what would the Marxists do to solve the conflict? Who gets the stick?
I mean, like, really, that is not a thing which Marxism, like that hypothetical, like Marxism is the study of society, and that is just not a society. That is simply, that is an abstract relationship with two equal people. But there is this interesting book, Anti-Düring, which actually answers kind of a similar question, and it answered it 100 years ago or 150 years ago or so. And the basic answer is that, like, this is not the core of society. The core of society is not just individuals trading with each other or like having equal relations with each other, because there is this force that you just, like, if you ignore this force, if you ignore class, like if you remove classes, then Marxism can no longer analyze that, because Marxism is just the analysis of societies with classes, kind of,
Would you say
from
that
the
people are
perspective
more
of
than
the
just their
proletariat.
class, though?
Oh yeah, of course, of course. I mean, every worker doesn't have the same interests as every other worker. That's just obvious. Like, I might have an interest in extending my lawn, and my neighbor, who's also a worker, doesn't have that interest, because then I would be reducing his lawn, right? So yeah, like, there are of course interests which exist outside of classes,
Okay. Um,
and yeah, sexism and racism and a bunch of other things, like systematic things, like social things, which are also based on, well, in some ways they relate to class struggle, but in some ways they also don't. So
yeah,
yeah.
would you say there's like a type of intersectionality that kind of intertwines with Marxism?
Well, intersectionalism is a really interesting thing, because it sounds very good, the basic explanation of it, but it's and it has been adopted. Like, a bunch of Marxists call themselves intersectionalists, feminists, and this stuff, but they're wrong. They're wrong, because intersectionalism, um, uh, does it, like, analyzes these individual interests of people to, just to the absurd, um, because it would reason that, the oppression, um, uh, like, if we, for example, that there is a bunch of unique oppressions in society, which is true, but that each of these unique, oppressions need to be fought in their own unique way, um, which basically means that, a white woman's feminism and a black woman's feminism is just entirely different feminisms, because the black woman has, for the black woman to free herself, she has to create this, combination of feminism and anti-racism, and the white woman doesn't need that. And if you're a disabled white feminist, you can't, like, your oppression is entirely different from all these other, and there's a bunch of other issues with intersectionalism. It was basically invented by a person paid by the CIA, who was a member of the CPUSA, so, like, the Communist Party USA. So, like, it's not, a concept I, as a Marxist, agree with, but that's because um, I've started developing my feminist theory a bunch, and it's just, yeah, intersectionalism isn't the play, kind of. There is better feminism than that, and better
Interesting.
fight against all
I'd
oppressions.
be interested in
But of
hearing that.
course, yeah, I mean,
But hold on. Well,
yeah, all
before we
right,
go
yeah,
there, you've said multiple times that you're interested in Marxist economics. So how about we go down that road, and you can tell me all about
yeah,
Marxist economics. Let me ask
yeah.
you: do you believe that a Marxist economy can be as profitable or more profitable than a capitalist economy? And if so, how? And if not, why is that a good thing to do?
Well, if we're talking about like profits is just not a thing that we care about. Like maximizing profits is just not the thing that socialism wants to do, or that Marxist, like socialism, the first stage of communism, and then communism, like it doesn't care about like making more money. That's just not relevant. The relevant thing is um, producing more and satisfying desires, which I guess is what you mean, and that is absolutely possible. Like if we look at productivity increases, you can see that the increase in productivity in like socialist experiments was immense. Like the Soviet Union went from a feudal backwater, like this underdeveloped like economy where everyone was starving every 8 years under Tsarism, which people really love to forget when they talk about the Soviet Union. They went from this totally desperate state to an economic superpower in a matter of 20, 30 years. It was an extreme rise in productivity there, and that's because well, the a planned economy can decide that we want to produce more, and then they do that, which they did. They had their 5 year plans, or first they had the new economic policy, but that's a little bit more complicated. But they had their 5 year plans, and like especially at first, like they did their 5 year plans in like 3.5 years. They completed those really, really quickly, and they just kept growing. And then there are other issues with the Soviet Union that are more like the issues with the Soviet Union aren't so much, in my opinion, that the economic foundation at first was wrong, more that the political foundation had certain errors which allowed like reactionary forces um, to coup the system and to start reintroducing capitalism. But um, socialism can absolutely be more profitable. Um, yeah, or more. It can prioritize everyone's interest. Um, like if we look at today, we produce like the world, the global capitalist economy produces enough food to feed like um, 4/3 of the population, which of course more than 100%, a lot more than 100%, and still capitalism fails to redistribute this um, because it's just not profitable to give food to hungry people. It's not always profitable, and so it's not always in the interest to do that. Um, and
Yeah, but do you think there's
yeah,
anything
you
wrong
could.
with? Do you think there's anything wrong with just wanting to be profitable? Like, if I'm talking personally, in my own
Yeah,
life, I don't see anything. Well, just to give you some background, I'm not very rich. I'm just a normal
yeah,
guy that
no,
works a part-time job.
yeah.
But as far as I can tell, I don't see anything wrong with wanting profit, and I don't see anything wrong with a limit to how much profit I want. So would you say there's anything wrong there?
But like the thing is this, that when we're talking about profits and capitalism, like you earn your money off of wages primarily, right? Like I don't know if you have
Yeah.
if you earn half your money from stocks, then okay, like that's a different question. But the thing is, wages. When I talk about profits, I talk about like the profits of the capitalists, like the the resources which either get put into um, which either they save, like the corporation saves their money, they give dividends, or they reinvest the money. And this is what I talk about when I talk about profits. But I mean, and again, that's your class interest, right? You want a higher wage. You want to spend less of that wage on on the things that you spend it on in order to be able to spend it on more other things or just more of those things, right? Like it would be really great for you if rent dropped by 20% and your wage rose by 20%. That would be great, right?
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, that awesome, right? And that's kind of a thing we are fighting for. we're fighting for it for a very specific reason, but because of course we don't base ourselves on some moral notion, or we don't primarily or first of all base ourselves on the moral notion that just we want to create a more moral society. But if we want a revolution, then you have to pull these contradictions between the capitalists and the workers to the edge. And the only thing we can do to increase the contradiction is to improve our conditions, the conditions of the worker, so much so that the capitalist gets pushed out, right? That the capitalist gets contradicted more, and so that forces them to start contradicting us more, and class struggle becomes greater. Like if yeah, it's
Okay. Well,
yeah.
and we talked about this a little bit before, but I'm still struggling to understand why for example, what is the justification for saying that like someone poor like me should be able to get more money at the expense of rich people? Like just playing devil's advocate, why
Yeah.
do I deserve the money more than they do?
So here we have to talk about a very basic principle or basically a premise of Marxism, which is labor theory of value. And I can run through an accurate description of it very quickly. Labor theory of value says, um, or talks first of all about use values. Every commodity has something you do with it. With a car, that it takes you from A to B, it's comfortable and it looks cool and it gives you social status. And with a jacket, it keeps you warm and it doesn't break. And these physical properties, the thing it does, right? That's the use value. And so the value of a commodity um, is the amount of labor time necessary on average in society to reproduce that use value. Um, so, for example, so that's just the core idea. And when you take this and apply it, and you look at the process of production under capitalism, we can see that there is this simple equation of what's it again? It's uh, capital plus labor um, plus profits equals the price of a commodity on average on a large scale. You can, of course, go without profit at some point, right? Like you can make a loss. That happens, but not on average. On average, capitalism is profitable. Um, and so in this equation, the only thing like that profit that come like everything in that equation comes from somewhere. That capital is things which like that capital was once a commodity. Like for example, the factory was once built by this process. It's a
It
recursive.
was once a pile of bananas and it became a
It was once a
factory.
pile of bananas. Yeah, sure. And the labor time is created because the worker ate enough and slept enough in order to be able to work now, and he has looked enough at Netflix in order to feel that he wants to work, and blah blah blah. And profit. Where does profit come from? The only part of that process, like tools by themselves, do not create anything. Um, it's only when you add labor into a process that it suddenly becomes able to do profit. And this is what we call surplus value. Like profit comes from the surplus value. Like when you work your part-time job, you work that 8 hour day that you work, or like maybe you work 4 hour days or so. Um, Essentially, what we Marxists are saying is 2 of those hours or something like that, you're working to just create your wage, um, to reproduce the value that's necessary to pay you. And then the rest of your time is spent working to create the profits that the capitalist gets. And just to clarify, we don't say that capitalists cannot work or that they do not work or anything like that. Elon Musk, of course, probably does a lot of things in his day to day that maybe creates values, um, or he sees to it that others create value, right?
He does like the
manages them
same.
and
You'd
all of
say
that.
he does the same amount of work, but his work has a higher influence on everything below him.
Yeah, but the influence he has more influence, but it's not because of the work he does. It's because he owns. It's because like the influence he has comes from his ownership of the corporation, not because of
Right.
his work really. And the profit, all of the surplus value that is created, is not created by the capitalist. It is created by the workers. Um, and so like for example, the way we can like make this obvious is of course if you look at say you get a job now, like I make you immortal and I give you a job, um, $2,000 per hour, and you work 8-hour days, 40-hour weeks, 52 weeks a year for 2,000 years, right? That's like you, and you didn't spend a penny. You'd have I'm not sure of the exact number, but it's somewhere between $1 and $10 billion. Like it's somewhere about like $3 billion or
Sign
something
me
like
up,
that.
boss.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is, uh, so it's kind of ridiculous to argue that Elon Musk worked what like millions of times harder and smarter than like he works every single time, every single day he just works like a million times harder and smarter than a nurse does. That's just not true. Like a nurse does complicated things, a doctor does complicated things. He is not working all that much harder. The reason he gets this money is not because he he works a lot more than us, even if he does. The reason he gets that much more money is because he owns the corporation and he controls what happens with that surplus value we were talking about. What happens with that value, and because he controls that, he can just take a cut, and he takes and like he can give dividends because he has to because it's a publicly traded thing, and he can sell his stocks or he can like do this thing where you don't have to pay taxes because you use it as collateral for a loan, and all this stuff. But the reason you as a worker have the right to take this profit is because it's you who created it. Like it's the workers who create. Again, the majority of people in society create the majority of value in society.
Yeah,
And
but I don't
so,
disagree. I
yeah,
don't disagree with you. But I have a question for you. Doesn't that seem like it would kind of point towards the subjective theory of value over the labor theory of value? And if we're strictly looking at this as observationists, as if we're just observing this and we're seeing what
yeah.
happens, aren't we seeing in effect the subjective theory of value? Because Elon Musk's
I mean,
companies like PayPal and stuff, they weren't picked up because he owned like billions and billions of dollars. They were picked up because he owned, thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then what happened was people saw PayPal. They're like, shit, this stuff's good. And
yeah,
so
that's the
millions and
process.
millions of
Yeah,
people took PayPal. And then what he did was he bought companies. He increased the value of the companies far more than the money he had. Then he sold the companies and then he reinvested that into newer companies. And he kept doing that over and over until he gets what, like $100 billion or whatever. So isn't
yeah.
that
So
just like the subjective theory
it's
of value?
kind of complicated when talking about digital services, especially like when you're the first to do something. The way that PayPal was the first to do something, that's very hard. It is describable by labor theory of value, but it's very it kind of bases itself on like the amount of study time you would have to do, and all of this in order to reproduce the use value of PayPal is just immense, right? Like you'd have to do a lot of programming in order to reproduce that. Like society would have to spend a lot of time reproducing that, and that's why it's high valued. Um, but the issue with subjective theory of value, I mean, it isn't an issue for Marx, for bourgeois or for capitalist economics, because you don't need to know where the value comes from. You just need to know what the value is. And so, like subjective theory of value, it just says that well, value is random. That's basically like, would you agree with that? Like on a
Yeah,
societal scale,
it's
value is
arbitrary.
just
It's based
random.
on
Right.
people what people want. Yeah, it's arbitrary.
Yeah, it's just we can just say it's random, it's arbitrary, blah blah blah, because it doesn't matter where the value comes from. You just have to have supply and demand, which of course regulates prices, and then you can by that you can find like the only thing that's necessary to do economics is what's the price of this, and you can perfectly explain the price using supply and demand. Um, but labor theory of value is like I've heard of studies. I haven't actually found these studies. I actually looked for them. I listened to a podcast with a Marxist economic who talked about how there are a bunch of studies on labor theory of value where it is shown to be like within margin of error. It explains why things are the way they are. Like it explains why the price of these commodities are roughly that, because of course there are price fluctuations. That doesn't mean the value has changed in the way that Marxists use the term value, but that like subjective theory of value in turn, you can't prove or disprove subjective theory of value. Like it's a non-disprovable theory, which means it's not scientific. Whereas labor theory of value, you could very well disprove that by finding some industry where you cannot find, like there's no one doing all of this labor, but somehow there's a bunch of use values created which are valued very highly. Like there are ways you could disprove it. It's just that you can't, because it's true, and or it describes reality very closely in my opinion.
But if I could push back real quick,
Yeah.
I would say that the subjective theory of value is something that we observe similar to like scientific phenomenon. So it's something that we see in human behavior where what happens is we create a bunch of definitions and then definitionally we say that the reason you bought the water is because you were thirsty and that's the reason you bought the water. And so if we do this
Yeah.
and we kind of scale this up on a societal level where we say, why do people do the things that they do? Well, they do the things that they do because they want to do the thing. And so this is kind of where we get praxeology, which is the
Yeah.
base of the subjective theory of value, which is why do people do things? People do things because they value them. So do you disagree with any part of that?
I mean, like I don't like the reason I disagree with that is because it's very observable in society that values are values exist. Values exist. Just yeah, certain people don't need this certain use value that this commodity has, and certain people need it more than others. But still, um, I might at some point need a match, and I might at some point need a car. I am going to pay a lot more for the car, and that is not because, or you could argue that it is like the match is perhaps a bad example because it's certainly a useless product nowadays. But if we take a phone, for example, everyone needs a phone, right? And
Mm-hmm.
everyone needs a car. And society can produce a whole bunch of cars if it wanted to. It could produce a car for fucking everyone if we really wanted to do that. Like that would be possible. But the thing, it comes into some Marxist economics, which I haven't read in a while. Um, I think I should reread that book, and I can recommend it to you too. It's Value, Price, and Profit by Marx. It explains, you know, the prices of commodities um, very well. But um,
But yeah, for the subjective theory of value, what do you disagree with
yeah,
exactly?
but I mean, what I disagree with exactly is that I believe things exist. Things come from somewhere. I believe that value comes from something real. Something real is done in order for something to be valuable. Like,
I might
yeah,
be able to speed this up because I understand what you're saying. Actually, I
yeah,
understand exactly what you're saying. You are saying that everything subjective comes from something objective, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and I agree with you
uh,
there.
yeah,
I think that when we use the word subjective, what we're saying is we're not saying that it's not objective. We're saying that it's so complicated that we don't know what it is yet. Subjective is essentially just something that we don't know what it is yet. We use subjective in saying like, oh, in my opinion, and subjectively speaking, but we know that all of those things, your
Yeah.
opinions
Okay.
aren't just generated randomly. Your opinions come from your biology and your environmental factors, which come from
Yeah.
something before you. So everything,
Yeah.
cause and effect, essentially. We believe in cause and effect.
Right. So, I mean, Marxists also believe in cause and effect, of course, but the we have to remember why we use theories. What are theories useful for? They're useful for describing and understanding why things happen, and they're only useful insofar as they are able to predict something. Like this is just a scientific definition of a theory, and it's why, for example, string theory is not useful in physics because you can't really use it to like logically it makes sense and makes sense on paper, but you can't use it to describe anything. Kind of like subjective theory of value, you can't really like apply subjective theory of value to understand why things happen in society. But because of what you said, subjective is just things we don't know why they happen yet. But we have this theory, labor theory of value, which is able to predict the value of a good in society. And it is and just by that quantity it is a better theory.
But I think the thing that we're not, I almost feel like when you're talking about the labor theory of value, you're not really distinguishing it much from the subjective theory of value. It's almost like they're the same thing because we can't find any
But
distinguishing features between them.
I mean the distinguishing feature, what's the distinguishing feature? I mean, uh, the thing is this, right? Like, um, there are a bunch of, oh my god, yeah, I really should have read that book again. It's hard, like it's hard to remember because I know the answer and I kind of know how, but I don't. It's kind of hard to express it.
Do
But
you want to like slowly
there
build
is,
it up? Like go back to your foundations and
yeah.
slowly build a case or whatever?
Okay, so when you have an industry, um, there is there is a certain amount uh, of investment done in this industry, with the idea that it is, at this point, like every individual who invests in something believes that this, or not really, but basically believes that this is the best investment at this point. This is the thing that would be the most profitable. This is the industry that at this point needs to grow. And the Marcus does this regulatory thing, right, where labor hours are allocated by the market by like investing in a company or divesting from a company based on, uh, when competition gets too sharp in an industry, this profit margin is lessened and lessened by the competition between the sellers. And so when an industry becomes stagnant in this way, that it isn't producing that profit, people divest from that industry, and so more of the man hours in society go towards producing this other thing, right? This other industry instead of this industry, um, and the reason that industry becomes more profitable might be that someone has made a technological advancement. And when you make a technological advancement, you don't instantly devalue like if you find a way to, um, let's take something
I can give you an
simple. If you
example.
find a, yeah, if you,
Amazon
yeah,
Amazon once said that they were going to create a store that doesn't have any cashiers, and because of that, they were
yeah,
going to use the additional profits of not having cashiers to lowering the costs of the food in the store, and in
I
that way,
mean,
they would be able
yeah,
to beat the other companies in
undercuts, yeah,
costs. Yeah, they would
yeah,
undercut them.
and because, but the only reason it's profitable to do that is because, even like if you have this sudden increase in productivity, right? Like less capital or less labor, um, can produce the same value. If you remember that equation I took up before, with capital plus labor plus profit is value,
Mm-hmm.
right? You remember that? Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you find a way to reduce um, the other two constants, or the other two factors here, you can increase the profit a bunch, and then you can also just like, and then you can use this tactic of undercutting the other guy in order to draw everyone to you, and you can have a profit margin that is larger than if you had just built a Walmart, right? That's
Right.
the only reason you do that, because if it wasn't more profitable than building a Walmart, you would build a Walmart, right?
Right.
And so, I mean, all of the things like subjective theory, like I think we come back to this again, that I mean, subjective theory of value is not like, it's not necessary to know where the value in society comes from. It's just, you do not need that, because you can just as well say that the value is arbitrary. Um, and then you just decide it using supply and demand, because you don't really need to know where it comes from. You just need to know that it's there and how much it is, which you can very well do using supply and demand and subjective theory of value. But
I wouldn't say it's good or bad.
again,
I would just say that it's something that is an observable phenomenon. Now, if you can
yeah,
tell me
and
otherwise, I'll believe you. But
like
like from what I can
the thing
see, it
is,
seems that it's just
we're
something
not
that happens.
we're not observing the subjective theory of value, though. Like the same way that Newton wasn't observing Newton's law when the apple fell, he was observing a phenomenon, and then he used a theory to describe it, right? Um, and that's the thing. We see the same phenomenon, but uh, the labor theory of value can explain and predict that event in a way that subjective theory of value doesn't do, and doesn't even claim to do. And the only reason that that is like doable is because, you know, as I've reiterated a bunch of times, it's not necessary for
Um,
capitalism to work to know
I
where
mean,
the value comes from.
do you have an example where the labor theory of value can predict something that the subjective theory of value can't?
But like the thing is, the subjective theory of value does not predict anything. Like it just says that like the value will just be a random thing, and then you have to use supply and demand to find the exact value, right, by crossing the lines. Um, because both subjective theory of value and labor theory of value are trying to describe why is the intersection of supply and demand, why is it there, like why are the curves where they are, kind of, or not.
So,
No, sorry,
so this
that's
is
not
what
what it's
I
trying to describe. I'm sorry. Yeah.
yeah. This is
I
what I
made a
would
mistake.
say.
That's
Backing
that
up.
was wrong. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Backing
Yeah.
up. This is what I
Um,
would say. As you were saying before, theories are like blueprints where we can predict the future by
yeah.
observing something for a really long time, and then using the scientific method, we test it over time to see how it holds up to scrutiny.
Yeah.
So, for
Which
example,
theory closer predicts reality?
yeah, pretty much. So, for example, if we were to like go up high on a really, really tall hill, and we both had apples in our hands, and
Hmm?
we kind of like we just put our arms in the air, holding the apples at the top of the hill, and we're like, guess what's gonna happen now? And then me and you are both like, oh, it's gonna fall and it's gonna roll down the hill. And the reason that we
Yeah.
think that the apple's gonna roll down the hill is because we have both, whether taught or not gravity, we have observed that gravity exists, and over time
We
we've seen
observed
that.
the phenomena. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we have whatever, the law of gravity or whatever.
Yeah.
And so, in the same way, what I would say, for back to the subjective theory of value, what I would say is that the subjective theory of value doesn't claim to prove much. I would actually say that it claims to prove very, very little. So little, in fact, that most people just take it as, like ordinary happenstance. I would say the subjective theory of
Yeah.
value would be like, if you go to a
It's just a
store,
premise.
it's a
Yeah.
premise. It's almost definitional. It's like, if you go inside, if your intent is to go inside to buy a TV, then you will go and buy a TV. And why is that? Because you subjectively value a TV, and that's the reason you came to the store. So I would say that it's such a low threshold that it
And
doesn't, as you said before, it
Yeah,
it
it doesn't
um it
describe
almost
anything.
it almost doesn't describe anything because it describes everything. We basically use it as like, why do you do things?
It's
You do
so
things because
much
you
that it's
value them.
nothing. Yeah,
It's almost
yeah,
what is the word? Circular.
yeah. It is very circular, and that's the thing I have the issue with because like I mean I'm not a physicist, but I know a little bit about string theory. I don't know enough to like be able to like do the calculations or anything, but the thing is, string theory makes sense and it can explain things, but it cannot predict anything. And so, thus, it's useless in science because if you cannot use it to predict anything, it's it's useless. And the only reason that in economics, subjective theory of value is accepted to exist, this theory that doesn't describe anything, that doesn't predict anything, the only reason it exists is because when you poke holes, like supply and demand cannot by themselves explain why values have why things have a price. You need a theory of where the value, what the origin of the value is. So it's just this kind of cookie cutter thing which you just put there in the corner and like, okay, if you really want to like understand why, like what supply and demand describes, then you just look at this little thing and you look at it for a second and then you look away. Whereas labor theory of value doesn't do that. Labor theory of value still fits into everything. Like every economist before Marx um, believed in labor theory of value also as just this little thing which was there, which like if you want to know why things are kind of like why do commodities have prices and why do they have values, you just look at that and then you look away. But
Then can
Marx
I ask you a
deeper,
question that will
yeah,
challenge the labor theory of value?
of course, yeah.
Okay, so what would you say with the labor theory of value? How would you take an account to say something like a supreme bag? You know what supreme bags are?
Yeah, so that's
So like a
very
supreme
easily
bag is
explained.
like a
Yeah,
super
yeah,
super expensive
or
bag
no, oh
that
yeah, yeah, that
probably
just says
didn't take a
supreme.
lot of effort to make. Like,
Yeah,
so like
yes,
somebody on an
yes,
assembly line basically made a supreme bag,
yeah. A
and the
Gucci
thing about a
T-shirt.
supreme bag is it's just a brand name. It's the same thing with Nike t-shirts. They're like
Yeah, yeah,
$100 t-shirts, and
yeah.
you can get the
I
same
understand the
t-shirt for
example.
$10. So how would the labor theory of value take into that account?
Labor theory value takes that into account because the thing a supreme bag has, is a use value that a regular bag does not have, which is the status symbol. It's a status symbol. When you consume this item, when you use this item, you have an additional use from it other than just carrying things or like even just owning it and having it in pictures with yourself because you're projecting this status. That is a thing. That is a use value. That's just straight up a use value, and thus to reproduce that use value, um, like the supreme bag is overpriced, right? But the reason it can sell is because people want the genuine thing, and like you could probably reproduce an exact copy with less money, with less with less resources. But the reason you can't do that is because you need the industry. You need You need
You need the
basically you need
IP.
to rebuild the entire. Yeah, you need the IP. You need the IP, and you need the. You would have to rebuild the entire industry, like in order to do this at a high quality, right? A really high quality. A Western investor, you would have to basically just create your entire own supply chain and then like smuggle them into the country. That's just like people do that, of course, and you know there is a reason that that's a threat to these corporations because it makes that use value more obtainable. It makes that use value take less man hours if you can just smuggle in a fake bag, and that's why they fight that. And so it, I mean, yeah, that's the basic explanation. There is an additional use value
Okay, I mean that makes
there.
sense to me, and
Yeah,
I think that might be a problem because it makes too much sense to me. It almost seems like
yeah,
it's the same thing that when libertarians talk about the what is it called? Subjective theory of value. When libertarians talk
yeah. It
about the
makes a bunch of
subjective
sense.
theory
Yeah,
of value, you just described what the libertarians are referring to when we talk about the subjective theory of value. So, would you even see a distinction there? Because what you just described is what we're talking about. So, do you think this is just a word
Yeah,
game
I
that we
mean,
can't see past?
it in some senses it is a word game, but the thing is that like labor theory of value is just they accomplish the same things, right? They explain the same phenomena, but labor theory of value just is a little bit more complicated, and it does it in and it explains it a lot more rigorously. There's this classic thing which people love to. There are a couple classic examples that people use to try and contradict, and I think yours is very similar to the diamond in the desert example, which is you're in a desert and there's a diamond and there's a water bottle, and like someone is selling a diamond, a really big diamond, really expensive, like you know, biggest diamond of all time, right? And a bottle of water for both $10, and you have $10, and you would and there is a high likelihood you would buy the bottle of water if you think that that will make you survive, and that's because this stone does no longer have the use value it has in society, where you can use it to flex and you can resell it because it has this great value as a novelty item that shows how rich you are and how cultured you are and how many connections you have, and like these things that go on in these rich circles, like the reason people buy art for $10 million. um but but yeah, it's just lacking that use value. It is just a rock, and you're in a desert, which is just a big pile of very small rocks. So like another rock, that's it has no use.
Right, because in
So
the
there's no
desert, the
reason to value
water
it.
is
Yeah,
a billion times more useful than the
yeah,
diamond. But in
yeah,
society, when we have so much water and it's plentiful, diamonds are really
yeah,
expensive because, like you said before, they're a status
yeah.
symbol.
And it and of course diamonds are being pushed out by fake diamonds, which are just as like literally the same atomic structure. And it's just like the diamond industry is really trying to cling on. Which, I mean, the diamond industry is going to disappear.
That's right.
Like
They're inflating the
real
diamond
diamonds
industry.
real diamonds will not be like real diamonds will be kind of like big real diamonds will be an interesting thing because of the history, kind of like historical artifacts in 50, 75, 100 years, maybe even 20. um that's my prediction. If that comes true, you come back and you become a Marxist Leninist. Okay.
Yeah, true. So true, dude.
Yeah.